Deputy Burke. Thank you very much for coming in. It's lovely to have you here. I just wanted to follow up on a couple of points that some of my other colleagues have raised throughout the morning. The licence to reside point that Deputy O'Connor raised, can you just give me a scale of, say, for example, the number of those that have been issued? What's the scale of that?
So, licences to occupy, in what context, Deputy?
Exactly.
That are unregistered.
Okay, yeah, do you know what that number is? Do you have any sense of
No.
what that is?
If I'm following you right, we don't know.
Okay. And what steps have you taken to try to identify the number?
Do you mean tenancies, Deputy, rather than licences?
No, I mean licences to reside.
Licences.
Yeah.
Okay, so licences are not strictly our remit, but it can be a complex area in terms of what's a licence, what's a tenancy, and people can assert, you know,
sure.
that claim that a licence is not a tenancy, but we wouldn't necessarily agree. So as we were saying earlier, any dispute that's raised in relation to that, the RTB will determine what the situation is in relation to any particular tenancy arrangement. But we don't know ourselves what's not registered with us.
Naturally.
Yeah.
So my question then was, what steps have you taken to try to identify those that should be registered that haven't been registered perhaps?
So some of that is to do with enhanced forms of data sharing between different kinds of public bodies, Deputy. There is an action in Housing for All which is about the RTB and the Revenue Commissioners developing an enhanced data sharing arrangement. So currently the RTB sends information to the Revenue Commissioners about tenancy arrangements, and that's to assist revenue with administration of the tax law. But we don't receive information from the revenue on numbers of taxpayers who are claiming various kinds of reliefs in relation to rent, which might indicate that they're landlords. So under Housing for All, there's a commitment to try and develop those data sharing arrangements, which obviously would mean that we would be proactively informed of circumstances where there might be unregistered tenancies.
Okay.
Local authorities sometimes come to us as well, or indeed members of the public, but we don't, I suppose, just to be clear, we don't.
Just because I know that other deputies said time is so tight, unfortunately. Yeah. So what I'm hearing is, correct me if I'm wrong, if a local authority has mentioned it to you, if a member of the public has mentioned it to you, you may be able to establish it. But it's not clear to me what proactive steps you've taken to date to try to identify the scale of that, or indeed ensure that they become registered.
Yeah, but
I may be wrong, but that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, the role of the RTB is to register the tenancies that are brought to us by landlords, and it is the landlord's responsibility to bring their tenancies to the RTB and have them registered.
And do you think that you should have any powers beyond that to try to identify unregistered tenancies?
Well, I'm very much in favour of proactive approaches to regulation, and I think it's very important that regulators have all of the powers they need to carry out their functions, fully and completely in the public interest.
So, for example, have you written to the department to look for those powers? Just to expedite it.
Well, in my short time with the RTB, I can't say definitively what we raised with the department previously in relation to that kind of proactive. Sometimes people will talk about this in terms of policing the sector. But in practice, that could be a very time-consuming, expensive, and potentially not very.
I understand. I'm asking, but what I'm asking about is from the management perspective of the RTB, what the steps that you have taken to try to remedy the fact that there are unregistered tenancies out there that should be registered. What the RTB's role in that. I appreciate your current remit, and I'm sort of asking A, what you've done about it, and B, if you've looked for additional powers that might give you more. If it's somebody else's responsibility, then have you identified whose responsibility is and how that can be followed up, or what's your role in that? But that's fine. I might move on to another issue unless there's anything else you want to add to that.
No, that's fine. I understand your concern, and we do share your concern.
Actually,
I'm probably not giving you the
what I'm curious is who's going to follow this up is my question.
Oh well, that's for us to follow up in terms of if there's non-compliance out there that's not being addressed, we should be in a position to address it if it falls within our remit.
Well, I agree, and it's this dynamism that that I'm looking, that sort of asking about really is what's the dynamic follow up to try to identify and redress these different issues that are identifiable.
I suppose my question. RTB is in a process of development, and that is very much part of our agenda.
Similarly,
be developing a new strategy this year, of which
I'm
that'll be
terribly
part.
sorry to cut across you. It
That's
is not
fine.
my style. In relation to HAP tenancies, again, I heard earlier you saying, they're not necessarily being given to you. Again, that it's coming up later. What have you done about that?
In terms of HAP tenancies, the position is that HAP tenancies are very compliant now. So,
tenancies are tenancies.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they
But
should
a
be
high level of compliance in terms of registration, we don't think there's a difficulty in that area, and we have very good liaison with local authorities and the Department of
And is it
Social
that,
Affairs.
so
in relation to it.
are they being registered by the landlord, or is it that you're becoming aware of it through the local authority?
Registered by the landlord is my
Okay.
understanding,
And
Deputy,
would you say that
proactively and correctly.
compliance is higher or lower than with other parts of the sector, or is there any difference?
Well, because we don't definitively know what is the non-compliance level across the entirety of the sector, we can't really compare. So all we can say is that it appears to us that the vast majority, and I think we know that 98% of HAP tenancies are registered. That's very satisfactory. And we'll find
Okay.
the other 2% and make sure they're registered as well.
I have a question sort of about, one is about the completeness of the registry generally, and I appreciate it is difficult, and so this is why I'm asking about those steps that can be taken to follow up and identify what's not there. Just in relation, and I have a question as well about the number of landlords leaving the market and your data on that. I might leave that with you just for a second, come back to it, but I just have one other question, which is around, we've sort of heard media reports about funds investing in rental properties, keeping apartments empty for a long time, apparently, so as to keep rent prices up. My question to you is, are you aware of that? Is that something that you think is happening? Do you think it's in, or what do you think it's in a fund's economic interest to do that? What would be the scale of the vacancy rate? What's your data on that?
Well, I'll ask my colleague if we have any data on that, Deputy. I mean, if a fund chooses to do that for their own commercial reasons, whatever they may be, it's not necessarily an issue for us, because until there's a tenancy, there really isn't a regulatory requirement. So that's where we don't come into the equation until the tenancy actually exists.
But what I'm asking then again is about this dynamism again. If there's vacancy identified within the market, whether by media or other ways, and this is again my question about landlords leaving the market, we have an extraordinary rental pressure at the moment. We're hearing reports of landlords leaving. We're also hearing reports of vacancy. My question to you is, I appreciate your regulatory function. What I'm asking really is, what steps have you gone beyond that to be dynamic, to try to identify problems that I and other deputies are raising to bring more into the market and to get a better functional rental market?
Well, just to repeat something that I sent earlier, Deputy, and then I'll let my colleague answer. We are not the market regulator, we're the tenancies regulator. And that's not to avoid your question, but just to be clear in terms of role and remit. And so we don't control or manage the market per se.
I do understand.
So, but I'll ask my colleague to come back on the point about the data, because we do conduct research, though, on this to provide insights.
Indeed. And you also, provide that, to help advise the government, and you have a strong interest in this sector working very well. So for all of those reasons, while I appreciate your statutory remit, I still have a reasonable question.
Oh, entirely, of course.
And just to come back on that, I suppose in terms of that fall in tenancies, we have seen that drop, from the 300,000, kind of to we've seen that drop kind of quarter on quarter, and we're now at 293,000.
Forgive me, just because you may have mentioned it earlier. 300,000 when? 290.
So we at the end of quarter 4 2018, we had 307,000 private registered.
373.
307.
307.
Yeah,
100,000.
And then that had dropped at the end of quarter 4 2020 to 297,837. So we can see the contraction in the number of tenancies. And when we specifically looked at the area of landlord exits in the survey that we carried out, and we spoke to a number of former landlords to establish their reason and for leaving the sector, and we've set out the number of reasons, and that's kind of picked up in a further study we're doing this year to inform policy to kind of
what were the reasons?
So the reasons are 72% said they had sold the properties, and 23% said that they were recovered for use by themselves or the family member. 9% said the property was in the process of being refurbished, and we are following that up this year with research. The other piece of data that we publish quarterly as well is when a landlord issues a notice of termination, that has to be copied to the RTB.
Sorry, can I ask you before my time runs out? If you've been told that the tenancy is being ended because it's being sold, do you ever actually check that?
We do.
Yeah.
Yes.
And do you find non-compliance or?
I don't have those figures, but there's a 9-month period after the tenancy ends that a landlord has to sell the property. So we would check the property price register, and we have identified some elements of non-compliance. But I would get the exact figures and come back to you on that.
Would you come back to that?
I'll let you back in.